Before Peyton Manning became the sheriff, before the audibles, the records, the MVP awards, and the Super Bowl celebrations, he was a boy from New Orleans carrying a famous last name and an almost impossible standard. Years later, on a February night in California, Manning would stand beneath the brightest lights in American sports. His arm was no longer what it had once been. His body carried the damage of 18 NFL seasons, several neck procedures, years of physical punishment, painful defeats, and constant criticism. Across the field stood the Carolina Panthers, a powerful team led by league MVP Cam Newton. Many believed the game had become too fast for the aging quarterback. Many believed Peyton had already stayed too long. But the final chapter of his career was never going to be about arm strength. It was going to be about survival. And to understand how he reached that night, we have to return to the beginning. Peyton Williams Manning was born on March 24, 1976, in New Orleans, Louisiana. Football was not simply a game inside the Manning home. It was part of the family's identity. His father, Archie Manning, had been a brilliant quarterback at the University of Mississippi before becoming the face of the struggling New Orleans Saints. Young Peyton watched everything. He saw the admiration people had for his father, but he also saw the pain that came with the position. Archie absorbed hits, carried expectations, answered questions after defeats, and returned to work without excuses. Peyton learned that being a quarterback was not only about throwing a football, it meant accepting responsibility when everyone was watching. Peyton was the second of three Manning boys. His older brother Cooper was charismatic and athletic. His younger brother Eli would eventually become a championship quarterback. But Peyton was different. He was serious, methodical, and intensely curious. Even as a child, he wanted to know why a play worked, why a defender moved, and why one decision succeeded while another failed. He was not the fastest athlete. He did not rely on spectacular improvisation. He developed habits. He repeated his footwork, studied formations, and listened whenever Archie explained the game. While other children imagined throwing the winning touchdown, Peyton seemed fascinated by everything that had to happen before the ball was snapped. At Isidore Newman School, Manning grew into a tall, polished quarterback with unusual command for his age. College programs across the country wanted him, and many assumed he would attend Ole Miss, where Archie had become a legend. Peyton chose Tennessee instead. The decision disappointed many people in Mississippi, but it allowed him to build an identity outside his father's shadow. When Manning arrived in Knoxville in 1994, he was not immediately handed the starting job. But injuries to quarterbacks ahead of him pushed the freshman onto the field. Tennessee struggled early, and Manning had to learn against defenses that were faster and more complex than anything he had seen before. The more responsibility he received, however, the calmer he appeared. By the end of the season, he had helped lead Tennessee to a victory over Virginia Tech in the Gator Bowl. It was the first sign that the stage did not intimidate him. Over the next 3 seasons, Manning became the center of Tennessee football. His preparation became legendary. He studied film, memorized defensive tendencies, and demanded precision from himself and his teammates. He was not merely running plays. He was learning how to control games. In 1995, Tennessee faced Alabama, a rivalry filled with frustration for the Volunteers. On the first offensive play, Manning threw an 80-yard touchdown pass to Joey Kent. Tennessee won, and Peyton was no longer seen only as a promising young quarterback. He was becoming a leader. Still, college football did not offer him an easy path. The Florida Gators repeatedly stood between Tennessee and its biggest goals. Manning could dominate most opponents and produce extraordinary numbers. But losses to Florida became evidence for critics who claimed he could not win the most important games. That argument would follow him for years. After his junior season, Manning could have entered the NFL draft and likely become one of the first players selected. Instead, he returned to Tennessee for his senior year. He wanted to finish what he had started. In 1997, Manning led the Volunteers to an 11-2 record and the SEC championship. In the conference title game against Auburn, he threw 4 touchdown passes in a 30-29 victory. He finished the season with 3,819 passing yards and 36 touchdown passes, winning the Maxwell Award, the Davy O'Brien Award, and the Johnny Unitas Golden Arm Award. But the Heisman Trophy went to Charles Woodson. For Manning's supporters, it was a painful disappointment. For his critics, it became another chance to question whether he could capture the biggest prize. Even after a brilliant college career, the story surrounding Peyton was clear. Greatness would never be enough unless it ended with a championship. The 1998 NFL Draft brought another debate. The Indianapolis Colts owned the first overall selection, and the choice came down to Peyton Manning or Ryan Leaf. Manning was viewed as prepared, disciplined, and dependable. Leaf was seen by some scouts as the greater physical talent. The Colts chose Manning. Indianapolis was not a ready-made contender. The franchise needed direction and hope, and Manning arrived carrying both expectations before he had taken a professional snap. His rookie season was brutal. He started every game, but the Colts finished 3-13. Manning threw 28 interceptions. NFL defenders disguised coverages, baited him into mistakes, and punished every hesitation. The game was faster than college, and there was nowhere to hide. But the interceptions did not break him. He studied them. To Peyton, failure was information. Every mistake taught him something about how professional defenses attacked quarterbacks, a safety leaning in the wrong direction, a linebacker dropping into a passing lane, a cornerback pretending to release a receiver. That approach changed the future of the Colts. In his second season, Indianapolis improved from 3 wins to 13 and reached the playoffs. The transformation was dramatic, but not accidental. The Colts were building an offense around Manning's intelligence, timing, and partnership with wide receiver Marvin Harrison. Harrison was quiet, precise, and explosive. Manning was vocal, demanding, and obsessive. Together, they developed one of the greatest quarterback-receiver combinations in league history. Edgerrin James added a dangerous running threat. Reggie Wayne became another elite target. Dallas Clark created mismatches in the middle of the field. The Colts grew into one of the NFL's most dangerous offenses. Yet Manning's greatest power appeared before the snap. He walked to the line, studied the defense, pointed at linebackers, changed protections, moved running backs, and shouted signals that sounded chaotic to everyone outside the huddle. But there was order inside the noise. If a defender moved with a receiver, Manning learned something about the coverage. If a safety rotated, he adjusted the route. If a linebacker threatened to blitz, he changed the protection or attacked the space behind him. The defense called one play. Peyton Manning could turn the offense into another. That command helped create his identity as the sheriff. He looked like a man enforcing order, controlling the field, and forcing everyone else to react. The nickname was not about speed or intimidation. It was about authority. By the early 2000s, Manning had become one of the league's greatest regular season quarterbacks. He passed for thousands of yards, produced winning seasons, and collected awards. In 2004, he threw 49 touchdown passes, breaking Dan Marino's single-season record. Indianapolis could score quickly and embarrass defenses. But January remained the problem. The New England Patriots had become the obstacle Manning could not escape. Their young quarterback, Tom Brady, appeared to represent everything Peyton was accused of lacking. Brady's statistics were not always larger, but his teams won championships. New England's defense changed looks, disrupted Indianapolis receivers, and forced Manning into mistakes. In the 2003 AFC Championship game, Manning threw 4 interceptions in a loss to the Patriots. The next postseason, the Colts returned to New England and scored only 3 points in another defeat. The comparison became constant. Manning was the record-setting genius who could not win when it mattered. Brady was the winner who collected rings. It did not matter that football was a team sport. Quarterbacks received the glory, and they received the blame. Every playoff defeat became a judgment on Manning's toughness, leadership, and ability to handle pressure. In 2005, the Colts started 13-0 and looked capable of finally breaking through. Instead, they lost at home to Pittsburgh in the divisional round. Another extraordinary season was gone. Manning had records, awards, and victories, but the missing championship overshadowed everything. He could not study his way out of the conversation. He could not audible away from the label. Then came the 2006 season. Indianapolis entered the playoffs with a dangerous offense, but a defense that had struggled against the run. The Colts defeated Kansas City and Baltimore, earning another meeting with New England in the AFC Championship game. The game began like a nightmare. The Patriots built a 21-3 lead. Manning threw an interception that was returned for a touchdown. The old story appeared to be repeating itself in front of the entire football world. If Indianapolis lost, Manning would once again be remembered as the brilliant quarterback who failed against Brady. Every future playoff game would carry the same doubt. But Peyton did not collapse. The Colts scored before halftime. Manning then led a touchdown drive to begin the second half. Indianapolis tied the game, and the stadium transformed from anxious to electric. The teams exchanged scores. With the Colts trailing 34-31 late in the fourth quarter, Manning received the ball with the season in his hands. He guided Indianapolis down the field. Pass by pass, he moved the offense toward the end zone. Joseph Adai finished the drive with a touchdown run, giving the Colts their first lead. Moments later, Marlon Jackson intercepted Brady. Indianapolis had won 38-34 after overcoming an 18-point deficit. Manning had finally beaten New England in the playoffs. Super Bowl XLI was played in heavy rain against the Chicago Bears. Devin Hester returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown, immediately placing Indianapolis behind. Manning remained patient. He connected with Reggie Wayne for a touchdown, continued moving the offense through the rain, and allowed the game to come to him. The Colts won 29-17. Peyton Manning was named Super Bowl MVP. For years, people had said he could not win the big game. Now he stood beneath the rain as a champion. The trophy did not erase every defeat, but it changed the meaning of his career. He had answered the question. He could win. Manning continued to dominate. He collected more MVP awards and kept Indianapolis among the league's most consistent teams. In 2009, the Colts began 14-0 and returned to the Super Bowl, this time against the New Orleans Saints, the team from Peyton's hometown and the franchise his father had once represented. The story seemed perfect, but the ending belonged to New Orleans. Late in the fourth quarter, Manning threw a pass intended for Reggie Wayne. Saints cornerback Tracy Porter intercepted it and returned it for a touchdown. Indianapolis lost 31-17. One pass reopened old arguments. Manning was already a champion. But critics again questioned why so many great seasons ended in disappointment. Peyton returned to work. Then his body forced him to stop. By 2011, problems in Manning's neck had become severe. He underwent multiple procedures and struggled with weakness caused by nerve damage. The quarterback, who had started 208 consecutive regular season games for Indianapolis, could no longer play. The Colts collapsed without him and finished with the league's worst record. That gave Indianapolis the first selection in the next draft, where Stanford quarterback Andrew Luck was waiting. The future arrived before Manning was ready to leave. On March 7, 2012, the Colts released him. Manning had transformed Indianapolis into a football city. He had led the franchise to division titles, playoff appearances, and a Super Bowl championship. Now, after missing an entire season and facing uncertainty about whether he could throw normally again, he had no team. Several franchises were interested, but signing him involved enormous risk. Doctors could examine his neck, yet no one could guarantee that the nerves controlling his throwing arm would fully recover. Manning chose the Denver Broncos. John Elway, the legendary quarterback now running the organization, understood what it meant to be an aging player chasing one final championship. Denver believed Manning's mind and leadership could transform the team, but the questions were unavoidable. Could he survive another hit? Could he still throw deep? Was Denver signing Peyton Manning, or only the memory of him? Manning had to rebuild his throwing motion and trust an arm that did not always feel like his own. Some passes wobbled. Some throws required more effort. But the mind was still there. In 2012, after a slow start, Denver won 11 consecutive games to finish the regular season. Manning was named Comeback Player of the Year. He had not merely returned to the field. He had returned to elite football. The season ended painfully, with a double overtime playoff loss to Baltimore. At 36, with a repaired neck and no guarantee of how long his body would last, Peyton could have decided that returning was enough. He did the opposite. The 2013 season became his masterpiece. On opening night against Baltimore, Manning threw 7 touchdown passes. Week after week, Denver overwhelmed opponents. He distributed the ball to Demaryius Thomas, Eric Decker, Wes Welker, and Julius Thomas, turning the Broncos into the highest-scoring offense the league had ever seen. Manning finished with 5,177 passing yards and 55 touchdown passes, both NFL records at the time. Denver scored 606 points, and Peyton won his 5th league MVP award. At an age when most quarterbacks were declining, he had produced the greatest statistical season of his career. Denver defeated New England in the AFC Championship game and advanced to Super Bowl XXVIII. But against the Seattle Seahawks, everything collapsed. The first offensive snap sailed over Manning's head for a safety. Seattle's defense attacked with extraordinary speed and aggression, overwhelming the most productive offense in NFL history. Denver lost 43-8. It was not merely a defeat, it was humiliation on the largest stage. Once again, Manning's achievements were placed on trial. Critics compared his championships with Brady's and argued that his greatest numbers disappeared under pressure. Peyton was 37. Time was beginning to win. The following season, Denver again reached the playoffs. But Manning struggled with physical problems and lost to his former team, the Indianapolis Colts. Denver then hired Gary Kubiak, whose offensive system asked Manning to adjust while his body continued to decline. In 2015, the difference was impossible to ignore. His passes lacked their old velocity. Defenders closed on throws that once arrived safely. Against Kansas City, Manning broke the NFL's career passing yardage record, but the celebration disappeared when he threw 4 interceptions and was benched. A foot injury removed him from the lineup. Brock Osweiler took over, while Denver's defense became the team's greatest strength. Von Miller, DeMarcus Ware, Aqib Talib, Chris Harris Jr., and their teammates attacked offenses with speed and violence. Manning spent weeks recovering and watching. For an athlete defined by control, There was nothing to control. He could prepare, he could support his teammates, he could wait. In the final regular season game, Denver struggled against San Diego and risked losing the top seed in the AFC. Manning entered in the second half. The stadium erupted. He did not return as the record-breaking passer of 2013. He returned as a veteran trying to restore order. Denver leaned on its running game and defense, but Manning's presence changed the rhythm. The Broncos won, secured home field advantage, and Gary Kubiak named Peyton the playoff starter. The final journey had begun. Denver defeated Pittsburgh and reached one more AFC championship game against Tom Brady and the Patriots. For more than a decade, Manning and Brady had defined each other. Brady had more championships. Manning had more regular season MVP awards. Their teams, styles, and personalities had been compared endlessly. Now they met with a place in Super Bowl 50 at stake. Peyton could no longer carry an offense as he once had, but he understood what the moment required. He threw 2 touchdown passes to Owen Daniels and avoided the catastrophic mistake. Denver's defense attacked Brady repeatedly. New England still had a final opportunity to tie the game, but the Broncos stopped a 2-point conversion attempt. Denver won 20-18. Manning had defeated Brady in their final meeting. The victory did not resemble the offensive explosions of Indianapolis. It represented adaptation. Peyton had spent his career controlling games with his mind and arm. Now he accepted that winning required him to play a smaller role. That acceptance carried him to Santa Clara for Super Bowl 50. The Carolina Panthers had finished the regular season 15-1. Cam Newton was younger, stronger, faster, and at the height of his powers. Newton represented the future. Manning represented knowledge fighting against time. Denver's defense took control immediately. Von Miller stripped the ball from Newton, and Malik Jackson recovered it in the end zone for a touchdown. The Panthers struggled to protect their quarterback, while Manning focused on avoiding the mistake that could change the game. It was not a beautiful offensive performance. Peyton completed 13 passes for 141 yards. He threw an interception and no touchdown passes. But the final chapter was not about statistics. With Denver leading in the fourth quarter, Miller forced another Newton fumble. The Broncos recovered near the Carolina end zone. C.J. Anderson scored, and Manning completed a 2-point conversion pass to Benny Fowler. Denver led 24-10. The final seconds disappeared. Peyton Manning had won his second Super Bowl. He had become the first starting quarterback to win Super Bowls with 2 different franchises. He had survived the neck injury that threatened his career, his release from Indianapolis, the humiliation against Seattle, the benching in Denver, and the decline that forced him to reinvent himself. As confetti covered the field, Manning did not look like the quarterback who had once thrown 55 touchdowns in a season. He looked like a man who had reached the end of an extraordinary journey. The glory came not because he was still the best player on the field. It came because he had learned how to win when he was no longer capable of being that player. That was the final lesson of Peyton Manning's career. He had always been known for intelligence, preparation, and control. He studied defenses until he could predict their movements. He changed plays at the line and transformed the quarterback position into a battle of information before the snap. But his last championship required something different. It required humility. It required him to trust his defense, accept his limitations, and understand that leadership was no longer about dominating every moment. Sometimes leadership meant protecting the team from your own desire to prove that you were still who you used to be. Peyton Manning's journey began as the son of a famous quarterback in New Orleans. It continued through Tennessee, where he built his own identity but learned that brilliance would never protect him from criticism. It moved to Indianapolis, where he transformed a franchise and became a champion. Then it nearly ended with damaged nerves and an uncertain future. Denver gave him a second life. He used it to produce one of the greatest seasons any quarterback had ever played. And when his body could no longer deliver greatness in the same way, he found another path to victory. That is why Peyton Manning became the sheriff. Not because he was the fastest, not because he had the strongest arm, not because every postseason ended in triumph. He earned that name because when he stepped to the line of scrimmage, the game seemed to belong to him. He saw possibilities before others saw danger. He turned preparation into power and information into control. For years, he dominated the NFL by knowing what was coming. In the end, however, his greatest victory came when he accepted the one thing no quarterback can audible away from: time. Time weakened his arm and reduced the physical gifts that once made him unstoppable. But it did not take his discipline. It did not take his courage. It did not take his ability to lead. When Peyton Manning lifted the Lombardi Trophy after Super Bowl 50, the moment represented more than another championship. It was the completion of a life spent preparing for the next play. The boy from New Orleans had carried a famous name without being crushed by it. The college star told he could not win the biggest game, had become a champion. The quarterback released after a devastating injury had returned to rewrite the record book, and the aging veteran who had been benched had found the strength to stand again. Peyton Manning did not leave football at the peak of his physical powers. He left with something greater. He proved that greatness is not measured only by how completely an athlete dominates when everything's working. Sometimes greatness is measured by what remains when almost everything has been taken away. And on that final night, with the confetti falling and the world watching, the sheriff had one final answer. He was still standing, and he was a champion.